right. Hello and welcome to Lion and Mouse Commentary. I'm Holland and this is my best friend Tori.
Hi.
If you're new to our show, we rank various forms of entertainment out of a total score of 10 with only 2 points allowed for our personal taste. Don't worry, we break down everything as we go. Feel free to agree, disagree, or just find something new to enjoy. But be sure to tread lightly. There will be hot takes and spoilers ahead. And cut to the intro. I think I've got this script memorized by
you're
now.
better than me.
Maybe it's because I listen to our, you listen to our episodes
listen to
when
them
you
to edit, and then I never listen to them again.
But you probably like speed clip over the intro, because
no, I
no?
just tune it out,
Oh.
and then whenever somebody says cut to the intro, I go, okay, time to do an edit.
Time to cut to the intro.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think maybe season 4 is finally the season where I've got the opener
Script
down.
memorization has never been my strong point, though. I'm like a crammer.
Mm-hmm.
I cram, I perform, and then I forget. That's how it's always been for me.
There you go.
So.
There you go. Film, not theater. It's your,
Yeah,
you know.
you can't do that in theater.
No, you gotta hold it all.
Yeah.
Anyways, if you didn't read our title, today I have chosen to finish out All the Wrong Questions series by Lemony Snicket. So this is book 4, which is entitled
Why is this night different than all other nights?
From All Other Nights.
From all other nights. I have
Mhm.
done it wrong in the thing. Should I change this?
Yeah.
Live editing?
Can you live edit?
Yeah, we can live edit.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's live
I
edit.
did it wrong.
It's From All Other Nights. There we go.
Got it.
There we go. Tori's magic. The magic of film editing.
Sorry.
It's all good. You can actually pull that book off the shelf too over there, because we might want to reference it for the podcast.
Do you need it?
No, I'm good for now. You're going to start our first category.
Oh, that's right.
But I will go ahead and read a little fact sheet about this book. So if you haven't listened to or read the first 3 episodes of this, then go back and listen to those first, because we might be referencing aspects of the first 3 books in the series. This is the last book in the series. But here's some information about it. If you're new to this book specifically, All the Wrong Questions is a 4-part mystery series plus a companion book written by Lemony Snicket, set in a formerly seaside town called Stained by the Sea, and featuring an almost 13-year-old Lemony Snicket attempting to unravel a conspiracy. In 2009, Lemony Snicket revealed that the prequels do have some overlap with a series of unfortunate events, which is probably his most well-known series, but it is not a continuation. It is also a highly autobiographical account of Lemony Snicket's adolescence and takes place before the Baudelaire children were born. The prequel series made its debut October 23rd, 2012, with its first book, which was entitled Who Could That Be at This Hour? The second book was released October 15th, 2013. The third book was released September 30th, 2014. And the final book was released September 29th, 2015. So almost every year in the fall.
Boom.
Yep. So book 4 was published by Little Brown Books for young readers, as were the prior books. It's 304 pages, roughly. The reading age is listed as 8 years and up, or grade level for U.S. schools would be grade 3 and up. Some accolades for the series overall. I couldn't find any accolades for this book specifically, but it did, I believe the first book, it won the Kirkus Best Book of the Year. It also won a School Library Journal Best Book of the Year and a New York Times Notable Children's Book of the Year. So this is the publisher's synopsis for this last book. So I'll read that. Train travel, murder, librarians, a season finale. On all other nights, the train departs from Stained Station and travels to the city without stopping, but not tonight. You might ask, why is this night different from all other nights? But that's the wrong question. Instead ask, where is this all heading? And what happens at the end of the line? Will the final book in Lemony Snicket's best-selling series, All the Wrong Questions, offer any answers? And then a fun fact is, why is tonight different from all other nights is a translation of the Hebrew ma nishtana. The phrase appears at the beginning of each line of the 4 questions traditionally asked via song by the youngest child attending a Passover Seder.
Interesting.
So, that's a fun fact about this.
Interesting. Huh.
Yeah. So, which is kind of the answer to that is in the Passover. The Passover night's different from all other nights. And
Yeah.
here's why. So
That's interesting.
yeah, I thought that was a fun fact, so I included that in there.
Cool.
So that is all the spoiler-free information we have for you. If you want to read the book before you listen to this episode, go ahead and click off now. Otherwise, Tori's going to kick us into our first category.
Okay, so our first category for books is plot, story delivery, and world building. And we allot 3 points for this. And I gave this 2.5 points. I think it's really good and really solid, but definitely not perfect. So I'll address those probably toward the end. So I really like that the collective like stress and problems, I guess, issues of the plot, not like issues as in they were poorly written, but like the stress that the characters are under, all of that collective stress, it feels very urgent from the start. And I think it's very close to teetering on manic, but it never quite crosses that threshold. And so because of that, I feel like this book overall, the pace and momentum is just so nice for what you would consider like a final volume of this story. So kind of just to like quickly recap the basic story of this book. So the idea is that Lemony is on this train from Staying by the Sea and it's going into the city. And his goal is to free the 2 people he knows on this are being held on this train as prisoners that are going to be put on trial in the city. And that's Qwerty, the librarian who's been falsely accused of arson, and Ellington Faint. Now, obviously there's much more to the story, but that's kind of like the basic like plot and Lemony's biggest motivation. Now that changes a little bit throughout the story. And you have this subplot where the rest of the cast, which I love the fact that the whole cast of characters that we've met up to this point gets integrated back in at some point or another in this story. And I love the fact that everybody is placed in such a way where their reason for being on the train makes sense to who they are and what they're trying to do. It never feels like super messy. And while a lot of it has overlap with other characters, it never feels like anybody's participation is not the word I'm looking for. Anybody's presence on the train is unnecessary. And I really like that. So the other members of the crew, I guess, you know, the ones that we've come to come love and know. So Moxie and Cleo and Jake and Keller and Ornette and, you know, all of these allies and friends of Lemony at this point, they're all aboard the train. And their goal is pretty much to trick Hangfire onto the train so that he can be captured and turned over to the authorities. So that's their goal. And they kind of work on these things separately while at the same time kind of helping each other out. And each member of the I don't even know what to call them, the friend group or whatever, the volunteers, if you will, each member of the volunteer group here, they all kind of have their own ideas about how to do this. And then they end up kind of overlapping with each other. They discover what the other people have been working on in regards to the common goal. And I like how a lot of that is kind of like played out and given. Now, one thing I really wanted to talk about is the fact that this book had 2 major plot points that took me completely by surprise. The plot twists. Now, super spoilers, okay? Super spoilers for anybody who is listening to this and doesn't want to be spoiled. You're going to be if you keep listening. So, the first one is Qwerty dying, being killed. I did not expect that, and I was convinced it had to be a joke or that there was something that I was missing or it was going to be revealed to be a trick or whatever. And then when it was revealed to not be a trick, he truly was killed. I was absolutely shocked. I was like freaking out. Like, I can't believe that they would do that. Like, but at the same time, I also kind of loved it because I did not expect it. And it just took me by surprise. And then a couple chapters later, Lemony gives you a warning that there is going to be another murder before the end of the book. And so then very shortly after, when Ellington Faint is shot with a dart, I was like, they killed QWERTY and Ellington in the same book? Like, I can't believe that would happen. I don't understand. Like, you know, I was just like so appalled, I guess, in a good way, you know, that this was happening, and oh my gosh. And then at the end of that chapter, it's revealed that Ellington was not dead, and I was shocked again, and I was like, I was tricked. But it just felt like, I don't know, like I'm so familiar with Lemony Snicket's writings that like those moments felt not necessarily apart from Snicket's style, but just like I'd come to these expectations and then they were subverted and then subverted and then subverted again. And I really liked that. I was happy that things like that were happening and that I wasn't just being like, oh, well, I called that. Oh, well, I expected that the whole time. I was also briefly surprised, but not quite as surprised about the fact that Armstrong Faint turned out to be Hangfire. I know that there were a couple clues in the series kind of leading into that, but I genuinely thought throughout the series that those were going to end up being red herrings that turned out not to be true and that Hangfire was going to be somebody else. So I was a bit surprised that it turned out to be him. Now, one thing that me and you talked about a little bit that I wasn't quite sure how I felt about was the setting / location of most of this book taking place on a train. Because I feel like with mysteries, the train location has become a bit of a trope. And so at first I was like, oh no, is this going to feel like tired or overdone? But if I'm 100% honest, I'm kind of a sucker for those train location tropes. Yeah. So I was like, but I personally like it. So like it,
You're a train fan.
Yeah. So it's like, am I being biased by the location because I don't dislike it? Or is it actually okay that it's this, you know? And you brought up a good point to me that like, well, it's probably a great homage to Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express, especially when the murder happens and that kind of solidifies. And I felt like that was a really good point and made me feel less bad about kind of liking the train location.
Yeah, that's what I thought pretty quickly once I found out that the setting was going to be on a train. Because I think even in prior books, Lemony Snicket, the author, kind of references Murder on the Orient Express as a literary work that exists in this world. So I felt like it was kind of there are a lot of classical, or I should say tributes to classical mysteries in the series. And so I felt like for a big like finale of this story of Lemony Snicket's childhood, I felt like it was a pretty good setting that you could have if the story has this track record, no pun intended, but this track record of having little nods to these classic mystery stories. And now your final chapter in book 4 is Murder on the Orient Express.
Yeah, that's fair. So that was kind of something that I wasn't really sure about at first when I was kind of reading through this. Now, I don't have a ton more left to say other than the fact that I really, really enjoyed this book. And while this was the only book of this series that was blind to me when we started prepping for this, I had read all of the previous series before we had done them for podcasts, but for some reason I had just not gotten around to reading the last book until we were prepping for this.
Yeah, this was blind to me as well. I forgot to mention that in our intro.
So I just really enjoyed it. I found myself just really loving it. But it's definitely not perfect. So I want to talk about the couple things that I really didn't care for. So I really didn't care for the fact of the abominating beast being a real beast. This sort of like cryptid beast that, you know, is bloodthirsty and dangerous and all of these things. Now, the reason that I didn't care for it is because I am familiar with Snicket's works, and in his other series, the closest thing we've ever gotten to a beast in that series are the giant squid in the Grim Grotto, which is book 11 of a series of unfortunate events, and squids exist in the real life. And then the lachrymose leeches in book 3, and leeches exist in real life. So even though these are like exaggerated or more dangerous versions of these animals actually exist in real life. So it's like, I'm fine with that. Like, that's not a problem for me.
Right.
But the abominating beast being this weird cryptid, like Bigfoot or the Loch Ness monster that turns out to be real, I didn't actually care for that because it felt too removed from this sort of grounded in reality idea that Lemony Snicket's world exists in. Like, of course, some things about Lemony Snicket's world it's a little bit sillier than real life, or whatever. But it doesn't feel like a fantasy book.
Right.
And all of a sudden,
it's like real people in the real world behaving in a fantastical manner.
Sure,
but nothing that exists in the world is actually fantastical
or magical or mystical like that. Like, everything has a very logical explanation in the world of Snicket. So this felt all of a sudden like we had shifted genres in the very final part of the book, and I didn't like it. It didn't feel like Snicket anymore. It felt like I was reading a fantasy novel that the fantasy beast has, just been introduced, and now we're at the end of the book, and I just didn't care for it. It just didn't feel quite the same. And then the other thing that I wanted to address is I am satisfied with the ending. Let me just say that. But I don't think it's perfect. And the reason for that is because I don't particularly... This could be like a moral conversation, and I'm not going to try to make it that way. We could discuss the moralities of this. But at the end of the book, Snicket murders the villain.
Which is the murder that he's alluding to when he says there will be another murder.
Right.
So he even acknowledges that it is a murder.
Right. So, and you're like, you could take whatever side on this as far as like, should he have done it? Should he not have done it? I'm not here to debate those things. I personally think Hangfire kind of deserved it. But the reason that I didn't love the way that unraveled is because the whole premise of like the idea of like the volunteers of VFD, they do the right thing even if it's hard. And this felt like it went against sort of like the moral thread that's like built upon through the whole series. And so while I'm not necessarily like super hung up about it, obviously like I only took half a point off for my negatives for the plot and story delivery, it didn't bother me like too much. I just noticed that it was like, that feels like an unusual way to answer the problem. Mm-hmm. When if I had like stopped reading before that chapter and somebody had asked me, how do you think Lemony's gonna solve this problem? Or even just not the chapter, but like the scene, like the moment before, stopped, didn't read before. How do I think Lemony's gonna handle that? That was not the thing that I thought was gonna happen.
Right.
Now it happened and I'm like, oh, well, he kind of deserved it. Like, so I'm not here to be like, I think Lemony Snicket did a terrible thing. But at the end of the day, he did murder somebody. And it's kind of alluded to in the original series. Lemony makes it very clear that like he's regretted a lot of things about his past and things that he has done, actions that he's pursued, has cost him relationships with people. And that's made evident after that happens at the very end of this book with the reactions of the rest of the crew, which I think are very justified. But again, it just kind of felt like now we are removing ourselves from the roots of what we know to be true about the Lemony Snicket world. And while characters in a book don't necessarily have to always meet my expectations, I'm not necessarily asking for that to happen. It does feel odd when it's your protagonist and the person whose like eyes you're seeing through mm-hmm. for the book. So again, I'm not here to debate, did he do the right thing or not? You could argue that perhaps by murdering Hangfire, he saved many other people. And I'm not going to argue with that. You're probably correct, especially all of the terrible things that Hangfire had done up to that point. So like, I'm not here to necessarily debate that, but it just felt like it was not Snicket at that point. Like those moments, the abominating beast and then your protagonist killing your villain, it just felt removed from what we know to be like foundational about these books. So for those reasons, I took half a point off, so I ended up with 2.5 points out of 3.
Okay. So for me, for plot and story delivery, I gave this 1 out of 3 points.
We are going to have very polarizing opinions.
Yeah, some polarizing opinions on this. So since you kind of were touched on it towards the end, I will go ahead and segue into my kind of comments on the kind of theme and like, I guess you could say moral as in like the moral of the story. I think this book just really falls flat in that aspect, especially in the context of the prior 3 books and in the context of Lemony Snicket's universe in A Series of Unfortunate Events, because I think a strong tenet of his writing in A Series of Unfortunate Events, which I'm not going to spoil that series, so this will be a spoiler-free episode for that, but there's very much a message that there are evil people who do villainous things, and there are good people who are trying to do good things to combat evil. That's kind of like at its base.
Yeah.
That's your setup for a series of unfortunate events. And usually the villainous people are responsible for these unfortunate events happening, and the heroes are often one step behind because they're playing by rules and a code of ethics, and the villains don't play by the rules. So, and you have instances in A Series of Unfortunate Events, which again, no spoilers, where your heroes, people that are presented as heroes, make unfortunate mistakes that result in dire consequences, people dying, villains winning, and yet it's never that they made an intentional decision they've never made an intentionally amoral decision or even a morally gray decision. It's that they were kind of given the trolley problem and they had to choose one or the other. And
what's the lesser evil?
Right.
Yeah.
And so they chose the lesser of two evils, or they just made a mistake because they were taken advantage of, or they were naive, and so I was expecting this series to kind of follow that same thread where maybe the villains do get away with things, but it's because they're villainous and they're not going to play by the rules. And I think having Lemony Snicket intentionally push Hangfire into the mouth of the abominating beast goes against every expectation set up as to what is the motivation of our heroes in this story. And I kind of account for that in characters as well. But I think there's an important point in this book which I do like. You find out that Hangfire, what is Ellington's dad's first name? Armstrong Faint. I kept wanting to call him Artemis Faint, but that's not his name.
Armstrong.
So Armstrong Faint is this naturalist. He's this great naturalist. And I'll talk about this a little bit in characters. So his motivation is very much like this Darwinism, survival of the fittest, the strong shall survive, the weak don't get to survive because they're weak. That is a very naturalist perspective. And I like that that's our villain's motivation. You know, only the strong survive, the weakest link don't deserve to survive. That's a very like cold look on life. And Lemony Snicket, I think at one point, I can't remember, I didn't write the page. Oh, wait.
Do you need the book?
Yeah, I think it's on page 198. So I think it's on page 198. Okay, so Lemony Snicket and Ellington are having a conversation. And Ellington's kind of realizing that her father's probably not alive. She doesn't know her father is actually Hangfire. And she says, Hangfire's tricking me all along. And Lemony Snicket says, the world is full of disappointment. And she says, yes, I heard him say that. And every creature is simply trying to get what it wants and to make their way through a difficult world. Do you believe that? No, I said, there's more than that. Like what? Like good books, I said, and good people. And good librarians, who are almost both at once. And it's like, your rebuttal for every creature trying to get what it wants and make their way through a difficult world being the worldview of life is that, no, what's more than that is that there are good books and good people. I think on the one hand, that is kind of a weak response. Although if you break things down to its basic simplicity, I guess for an 8-year-old, like, okay, maybe. One, I think it's a very morally difficult theme to tackle at this stage in the game. And I think Lemony Snicket, the author, is ill-equipped to address this huge moral worldview discussion. And then for the end of the book, Lemony Snicket, the character's response that no, there's more to life than people just trying to make their way through the world at whatever cost. And then he decides he's just going to push Armstrong Faint into the mouth of the abominating beast. Like, you just undid your moral theme of this whole series. And I think that's really problematic because what Lemony Snicket, the character, should have done is been that good person and made the decision to rise above, like you said, the easiest way out, which is just to push our villain to his death so that he's no longer a problem. And I understand, I think another argument people would say with Hangfire's fate being that is that, well, look at the law that was available. They wouldn't do what needed to be done to to enact justice. Like, they wouldn't arrest Hangfire. They were being manipulated by Stu. The officers' missions were being manipulated by Stu, who's working for Hangfire anyways. And so if you left them to the law, then the law wouldn't have enacted justice anyways. And I feel like literally the train is on the way to
the courthouse.
Yeah. Like, there are plenty of people there.
Yeah, just tie him up.
And you way outnumber him. So to kind of like, I was going to kind of cover that at the end. But I have a huge problem with that as the kind of end summation of this story is that Hangfire has this naturalist, dog eat dog, only the strong survive mentality. And the rebuttal to that is, no, there's more to life than that because there are good people in the world. And then our protagonist that we've been following this whole time makes the conscious decision to do something bad in the face of adversity instead of choosing the higher road and choosing good in the face of adversity. And so that's the biggest reason I did not give this full points. I did like a lot of things about this kind of plot setup, but that part of the book, which is I think like 3/4 of the way or 2/3 of the way through, is where I really felt like the ending of the story kind of fell flat. So that's the biggest reason. I feel like if you're not going to end your series well, then like you've got to give your audience a good resolution of the whole story. I do like how there's a night at the beginning. So I kind of start kind of towards the beginning of the story things that I did like. I liked the recap at the beginning. I love when a chapter book or a kid's book just gives you a nice summation. Like,
without
recap.
feeling like an info dump. Yeah.
Right. Without the whole chapter being nothing but repeating what we've already read.
Yeah.
I like this kind of tone of finality in the story where Snicket mentions that he's never going to see his room again or Prosper Lost again. I do have a bunch of questions, like how much time has passed? How long has this been going on? There's not much urgency about Hangfire at the beginning of the story. I don't think there's a lot of connection into how any of this plot of the story connects back to these kidnapped children and the fish tanks and all of this like evil deeds, sinister deeds that are going on in Stained by the Sea. I feel like we just severed that entire plot and now we've moved onto this train to try and trap our villain, which is revealed pretty late in the story. But Lemony Snicket's whole goal is to follow the prisoners and make sure Qwerty doesn't stand trial. And I felt like it felt very disjointed from like, I thought we were trying to save all these kidnapped kids, and now literally they're never mentioned again after the last story. And in the last book, they're not freed. They're still being like laced with laudanum. We just saved the library. And so I felt like I was a little confused, like, how is this all going to tie back into Stained by the Sea? And it doesn't. So I didn't have a problem with that because I felt like as you progress in the story, you're like, oh, okay, we're trying to capture our main villain. If we cut off the head of the snake, then the rest is going to follow.
Resolve, yeah.
But I didn't think it was tied in very well. So it was a little confusing how that train kind of relates to these kidnapped kids. I feel like this little nod to Murder on the Orient Express was really good, like you kind of mentioned with the setting. I liked how Polly Partial is reading, it's very clear that she's reading To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
And Lemony Snicket's leverage is that he's going to spoil the ending, which I think is fantastic. I thought that was great.
I thought it was very funny too.
It was very clever and it was very on brand. But I was a little disappointed because I thought that To Kill a Mockingbird was going to be foreshadowing for this book. I thought it would have been great foreshadowing because in the end of To Kill a Mockingbird, like Lemony says, the lawyer makes a good case, but then the wrongly convicted criminal dies at the end. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was going to be Cordy. That they were going to get to the courthouse. I didn't even think
about that because he references like real works of media like so much that I didn't even think that could be, but that's a good point.
I thought we were going to end in the courtroom, and I think another reason I keep getting Hangfire's, like Ellington's dad's name wrong, Armstrong Faint, is because it's a very clear nod to Atticus Finch.
Oh.
So I feel like it's very like phonetically like a phonetic
that had
mirror.
To be purposeful. Knowing Snicket, that had to be purposeful.
Yeah, and so I was a little disappointed that we didn't get that towards the end. I liked this kind of twist with Cordy being killed and S. Theodora Markson being framed for it, but I did feel like it was obvious that it was either someone disguised as S. Theodora, or I thought that she didn't do it, but then I thought it was very odd that she's just standing there with her hair hanging in her face and doesn't say a word for the whole rest of the story. I thought it was very odd. I felt like she was kind of written out of the story, but not really because she's accused of murder. So I felt like we could have gone a lot of places with her and kind of wrapped her up as a character at the end. And I felt like that kind of plot thread got dropped a little bit. But I did like that twist. I thought it was going to be I thought Hangfire was going to be in disguise as Theodora and then have murdered Cordy.
I guess my perspective of that, just a quick note, is that in my head, S. Theodora being a member of VFD, I believe that Cordy was too. That's not confirmed, but
it was.
Oh, it was. Okay,
it was.
So
they have a conversation.
They're both members of VFD. He gets killed, and in my opinion, maybe it was kind of like the cheap road to take in regards to her character, but I felt like she doesn't say anything because it's her final straw of realizing and having to acknowledge that she is kind of a failure in a lot of regards to like VFD's volunteering. And she talks about that a lot throughout the series about how she's like the worst rated volunteer and blah, 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 blah. And to me, it was just like she was just so defeated and discouraged at that point. She had nothing left to contribute, and so she wasn't going to contribute at all anymore. And I think that there was probably a level of guilt to that too, watching a fellow volunteer potentially like get killed and now she being accused. And that was just how I translated it. That doesn't make it true. That's just my personal theory.
I also kind of liked how we finally get back to Lemony Snicket and Moxie as a duo. I like that at the end of the last book, we had this kind of huge Avengers-y kind of like gang all together, working together. And I like that in this story, we've kind of separated everybody. Although I think the reason why is really flimsy, as like, oh, we're all going to scatter to the winds and do our own work. I'm like, well, then why did we all get together in the last book? But I really liked that Lemony Snicket runs into Moxie, and then it's just back to the two of them together. And they're this really smart, really clever duo. And Moxie's kind of taking the helm and like organizing things and coordinating things. I really liked that we got to just go back to the basics and kind of deconstruct back into this duo of Lemony and Moxie, and then the friends get added back to the group to work together. I think that it was very well organized in keeping everything very clean when it could have been really, really messy because we've added so many characters to this story. And I also like that we're back to the Abominating Beast, finding the Abominating Beast, and like this is, back to the VFD from book 1 with like Moxie taking the helm. So it's back to kind of our original like return to form. I thought it was really good. And then I felt like we were kind of teased after that, because then afterwards, Lemony Snicket's like, all right, Moxie, you hang out here all by yourself. I'm out. And then I was like, oh man, I felt like we were going to have this nice, like dynamic duo back together. And then Lemony's kind of off on his own for the rest of the story, which I guess could be seen as like, this is the final culmination where our hero has to take the rest of this journey on their own. But I also really liked that return to Moxie and Lemony together. So I felt like I was a little teased there, but I still think it worked pretty well. This conversation with Lemony Snicket and Sally and the porter that's not really a porter, I felt like that felt really weird. Like it didn't seem like it connected. It felt like a kind of a waste of time as I was reading it. I thought Hangfire, I was also really surprised at Hangfire shooting Ellington with the dart and then the dart misses her. But then I felt like the explanation of it was really unbelievable. It was like, oh, I caught it and then put it on my neck and fake died. I was like, I don't think you could trick like the biggest, baddest villain.
The way that I read it as described was that she saw him shoot the dart, pretended she'd gotten hit, and as she fell, she grabbed it from the table leg.
Yeah, I think that was pretty unbelievable.
Oh, okay.
It's like if I shot a dart at somebody, I think I would know if it hit a table leg. Like,
right, like as Hangfire.
Yeah. Like I'm sure he knew.
But part of me also wonders if that was planned between them on purpose.
That's another thing I thought about towards the end.
That was how later I was like, because I think Snicket is kind of just like, it's always the same with you. Like, I think he kind of has this like moment with her.
Yeah.
And when Hangfire's like saving her from being tied outside of the window or whatever.
Yeah.
And so Snicket's like, I did all of this. And like, it's always the same with you. You're always just doing what he wants or whatever. So in my head, it kind of makes me feel like Ellington actually knew her father was Hangfire.
Yeah. Knew it the whole time.
Yeah.
I think that's very possible. I didn't think about that they were in cahoots the whole time.
Yeah, and so this whole charade is just like a play for Lemony's benefit, really.
Yeah. I think that's valid. I do think that there's a lot of exposition in this story that to me felt pretty unsatisfying. I thought that like isn't it revealed that Stu murdered QWERTY? That was just like told to us in dialogue exposition. I would have liked it if this really was like a mystery, like Murder on the Orient Express, which were hinted at, this is an homage to. It would have been nice if there were a few clues along the way, even if it was just within a few paragraphs, like in the second book, I think, when Lemony's walking up the steps and he hears that it's Armstrong Faint's voice, but then all of the clues in the room let him realize that it's not the Colonel, it's Hangfire instead. Even if it was something that simple, like where Lemony's noticing like different pieces of the clues to then piece together that it was Stu and not Theodora. And then at the end, the very, very end with the train after it derails, and the exposition between Hangfire and Ellington and Lemony Snicket, all of this exposition at the end, it just felt like expositional dialogue. And I wish that we were kind of revealed some of that information as we go, rather than this kind of what felt to me like very boring and kind of stagnant exposition towards the end. I wish that was kind of revealed to us slowly as kind of like clues and pieces, like the fact that Ellington says that her father's a great naturalist. Like that kind of connects you into the fact that Hangfire's obsessed with this abominating beast that's a real creature, and he has this very strong opinion on this kind of survivalist mentality. It kind of weaves these threads that, okay, what Ellington says about her father and the way Hangfire is behaving starts to connect and make sense. I wish there was more of that in this story, and I think the audience of this book is intelligent enough to kind of connect those dots, even if they do at the end need a little bit of exposition to connect those pieces for them. I also thought it was a little arbitrary for all of the gang to just split up at the beginning of the story. I think I may have kind of mentioned that as well. And I also think at the end, the very end, they arrest Ellington, but not Lemony Snicket, who literally pushed a man in front of a bunch of witnesses that, like, he literally murdered Armstrong Faint in front of everybody, and yet they're gonna arrest Ellington. Like, to me, I was like, well, this is just like goofy at this point. I felt like this was just very unsatisfying towards the end there. But I do think in general it's set up really well, and I thought it was paced pretty well, but then just the ending, I feel like you undermined the entirety of the series, and then even contradicted the kind of like good versus evil themes, the moral message of a series of unfortunate events too. So that's why I didn't give it full points. I gave it 1 out of 3. So
Okay.
that's my score.
So the second category for books is quality of writing. We allot 1 point for this, and I gave it full points. Maybe I'm predictable, but I think that the way that Snicket writes things just in his prose is just good, and I like it. And I know I am slightly biased, and I know that affects it, but I genuinely think it's great.
Do you need the book?
I would love the book for a few examples. Thank you. I knew you would know that I
Getting
needed
you
it.
ready for it.
So if you've ever looked at our worksheets on our website, which are available and you can print them out and use them yourself for all sorts of things, it's the exact same ones that we use, but we have little bullet points under each category. And we do that as reminders to ourselves of just things to be looking for, and good talking points for each category. And I feel like for books, quality of writing, it's, even though we only allot 1 point for it, I feel like each of those is something worth talking about, and it's hard sometimes for me to pick and choose what I want to talk about in regards to like books, especially books that I think are done really well. But I'm just gonna hit a couple of them really quick. So we've talked about this before, but vocabulary, I love vocabulary in Lemony Snicket books. It's never written like it's the Silmarillion, but it's also a great way for young readers to get words they're not going to see in books generally geared toward younger audiences. And not only that, but often great explanations or usages of those words. Because like for me, when I was growing up, if I was reading a book and I didn't understand the word, I'd a lot of times use the context around the word to help me figure out what that word means or how it's used or what may be trying to be conveyed. And Snicket does a fantastic job of introducing an unusual word and then telling you what it means and how it can be used. And I just think stuff like that is so great. And it's never in such a way that it really pulls too far from the plot. It's always relevant to what's going on. And I just think that that's great. The humor, I mentioned in the last book that I felt like the humor was kind of at an all-time low in the all-time low. We've talked about them. But like
go listen to season 3.
Yeah, in the series that like I felt like book 3 was just not very funny comparatively. But I felt like the humor was kind of back up again in this book and never in an inappropriate way. And I have to thank Snicket so much. He doesn't use like what I would consider like juvenile or crude like jokes. Like Snicket's jokes are not Stitch fart jokes. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, and I appreciate that because as an adult, I can read a Snicket book and actually laugh at the humor and not be like, oh, it's another fart joke or whatever, you know, like, and I just appreciate that. I felt like that was back up. I felt like the dialogue was a little bit exposition. Is that the word? Expositional?
Yeah. That's
but
a word.
I don't, that doesn't bother me. I like exposition. I like exposition in books. I like exposition in video games. I'm not against exposition. Not to in any way invalidate your perspective, just that it does not bother me at all. I also appreciate the fact that the length of this book is not really any longer than any of the other books in the series. I always get nervous when I have the final book of a series and it's like double the thickness. Yeah. And I'm like, oh boy, here we go. It's going to take a while. And I am so glad that this is about the same as the other books in the series. I actually think book 3 might be the longest book in the series. Page count wise. Yeah. So it's just, I appreciate that it was kind of like wrapped up in less time than a lot of authors. I feel like I'm allotted to all of this extra pages because it's the final thing. And, you know, I appreciate.
They really are not sure how to end it. So they need more time to like tie all these loose ends together. So
I appreciate the length. But some more specifics. So I really think that the immediate momentum of the pacing of this book is fantastic for me. Especially compared to the last book. I felt like finally I am taking steps along with the author as a reader, and I feel like things are moving and I want to keep flipping the pages instead of coming to a point where I'm like, I'm getting a little burned out reading. I've been sitting here doing this for an hour, so I'm gonna put the book down and go do something else, which is a totally valid thing to do as a reader. I I feel like when I was younger, I could sit down and read for 4 to 6 hours and it would just breeze by. And as an adult, it's difficult for me to do that now. I don't know if just my brain focus has changed or whatever, but it's very difficult for me to do that now. But I felt like it was much easier when I picked this book up to just keep going.
Yeah. I felt that way too.
Yeah. So, I really appreciated that pacing and momentum. I love the way Snicket takes sometimes the most unusual phrasing or word picture. We've talked about this before, and he uses these as analogies and they just fit and make sense, but it's not anything that you've ever really heard before said that way. Let me find the example. I didn't write the dang page number down, which I should have, but okay. So it's actually after Lemony has talked to the 3 librarians that are covering for Hang Fire and Stew, and they're just not volunteering any useful information. So it says, I slammed out of the compartment as scornfully as I could, although not as scornfully as I wanted. I stood in the corridor feeling like an angry pebble. It did not matter where I rolled off to. And I was like, that's such an unusual thing to say.
Yeah.
But like, you understand it when he says it, and he uses that kind of language all the time. And it's just become very indicative of his style to me. And it's one of the things that I love so much about it. He's just very good at evoking this certain like mental image or feeling that's very specific to that small thing. And it's like when you think of like the word scornfully, it has a different nuance than just like being frustrated, you know, or something like that. But when you think of like, I felt like an angry pebble, it did not matter where I rolled off to. It's like, I've been there where it's like, I'm just seething about something. And to me, I have no desire or care about like what happens next, because I'm like so deeply seated in whatever I'm upset about right then. And I think it's just like a very specific feeling, and I just like something like that.
Yeah.
My final note for quality of writing is I kind of am not sure again how I feel about this, but I didn't at the end of it, I didn't think it was necessarily a negative, but the very famous phrase that Lemony uses in his main series, with all due respect, he picked up from Ellington in this book. And he says, it's a phrase I had not heard used this way before, and I adopted it, or whatever he says. It's not, he doesn't use that exact verbiage, but he basically says that it made such an impact on him hearing Ellington say, with all due respect, Lemony Snicket, and she continues her sentence, and that impacts him so much that he then uses that phrase all the time. And it becomes like a coined Lemony Snicket phrase in the main series. And I was like, I don't know how I feel about having it attributed to Ellington of all the characters, because my opinion on her is kind of weird, but I'll talk about her later. But like, I did think it was nice seeing that another tie-in like that. So that's really all I have to say. I decided to give it a full point for quality of writing.
Nice. Okay, so we keep passing this book back and forth. Okay, so I gave this 0.5 point out of 1 for quality of writing. I agree with a lot of the points you've made. I think that I would say in general, I think a gripe I've had with this story from book 1 is I think it's not a good utilization of first person narrative, and I think that still continues in this story. And then I also think that there is a lot of like expository dialogue and like spoon-fed exposition in this story that I think is not as eloquent as some of the things we've seen in Lemony Snicket's prior works, and certainly in other children's literature as well. I think that one aspect of a series of unfortunate events that I think is done very well is that a lot of this narrative is not spoon-fed to us. And many people that read a series of unfortunate events read it when they're young, and if they reread it as they mature, they understand some nuances in the story that they didn't appreciate when they were younger. And I don't think this story overall, and this book specifically really has a lot of that. So that's those two big reasons I didn't give it full points. But some positives I had, page 2 through 3 is literally the recap of the prior stories. It catches us up. It's not overdone, and the tone, and it has as much of resetting us into the tone and the mood of the story as setting us up with the facts of the story that we need to know before we jump into this narrative. Lemony Snicket's style of writing is just really good. I think that on when Lemony Snicket's referencing Prosper Lost and the hotel, he talks about basically both of them being damaged. And I think that's such a mature statement that would go over a lot of children's heads, because Prosper Lost has lost his daughter and needs to be reunited with her. And the hotel is just kind of crumbling. Since Prosper Lost kind of lost his wife, his kind of life is just damaged and kind of crumbling.
They're like parallels
and
of each
decaying.
other.
Yeah, it's a nice little parallel. And for Lemony Snicket as the character to be observant of that and then tie that into the narrative, I think is just, there's a lot of moments like that that I think are done really well. I think there's really nice tension building when Snicket's jumping onto the train. In chapter 3, it's him, standing on the platform about to jump onto a moving train, and I think there's nice tension build up, but it went on way too long. It took so long for him to jump onto that train. I felt like chapter 3 lasted half the book. It just felt so long and dragged out, and I understand that we have this tension building, but then the majority of the book takes place on the train, so it's just all this narrative and like swirling of Lemony Snicket's mind about like, oh my goodness, I'm about to jump onto a moving train. It's like, I get it. Okay, just jump onto the train. Maybe I just have a short attention span, but I felt like, but it was literally 10 pages before he jumped on the train. I counted because I was like, this is so long. This is a 300-page book and this 10 pages of buildup before he jumps on the train. I feel like that was just way too long. I thought that, some consistency in the writing. This could go into characters, I guess, but I also thought that it was surprising when S. Theodora was planning to rescue Cordy, but yet it still stayed consistent with her character. It was a surprising move for her character, but there was still consistency in who she is and how she wanted to go about it. So I would kind of account that into kind of the quality of writing a little bit, as well as characters, because I liked that it still made logical sense and still fit this person. She didn't have this switch, flipped, and now all of a sudden she's this noble,
a hero, or
right?
Whatever,
this noble, heroic person. So I appreciated that as well. There's a couple moments I really liked. I'm turning to page 118 in my book. If you're following along, when Lemony Snicket is talking to Kit, and he says that he wishes she was here. And then he just has this moment where he's feeling homesick, and he has, I hadn't seen the city since my apprenticeship began, and for a moment I felt so homesick I had to stop and lean my head against the glass. Dear Kit, I thought, and then I said it out loud. I wish you were here. My voice was quiet. Kit didn't answer. Nobody did. I let myself rest against the window for 10 more seconds, and when 20 seconds were up, I stood and walked to the next compartment door. And it was like, we finally have a little bit of humanity in Lemony Snicket as a character. And I felt like it was a nice way to put it. It was done really succinctly. And I feel like I've been waiting this entire series to just have these moments.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that a bit in my next category.
Where Lemony Snicket is a human person and a kid and not just like this narrator.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I liked on the following page is this map. I'll try and show the camera. But this is like one of the illustrations in the story, and it gives us this nice framework of kind of where our story is taking place and the different compartments that Lemony Snicket is referencing in the story. And I thought that was a great use of illustration. It really helps put everything together and helps you kind of see the closeness of these characters to each other, the compartments, where the prison is, and just kind of gives you a nice reference, because I think in a train compartment, if you've never been on a train compartment, which I feel like a lot of people haven't, it's very hard to conceptualize like what's the proximity of these people to each other and where is this taking place without it having to be so bogged down in narrative description that they just gave us a nice little map, and then we can, reference it if we need to. And I think it's very age appropriate as well. So I really liked that part of the story. I think for like what you read about the pebble, I think my kind of version of that, let's see, later in the story, my microphone's blocking the page numbers. I can't see them. Let's see. He talks about what a salute is. Cleo, I think, hands him something, and then, Moxie hands him something, and it says, "She handed me one and gave me a sort of salute. A salute, if done right, is like a handshake, a hug, and some brave and noble words all rolled into one silent gesture. I gave her one back that I hoped was good." And I think it's just a nice little, description. It's so succinct, and yet it gives you, it's one of those Snicket isms, if you will, that gives you a visual concept of what's happening, but then gives you all of these emotional ties that are kind of rolled into these moments between characters. And so I liked that a lot. I thought that was really good. One thing I did find confusing was that I felt like there was this moment where Lemony Snicket has this very dramatic reaction to finding out. I can't even remember what it was. Okay, yeah, sorry. It's this moment where it starts on page 144 and goes through page 147, where Lemony Snicket has this very dramatic reaction. He's he sits down on a bench, and then Moxie comes over and puts her hand on his cheek. And she's like, "Snicket, what happens?" And he says, "I have some bad news." And then they're having this long, dramatic conversation about QWERTY's murder. And he talks about how bad news can hit you like a train. It will knock you over and leave you flat, but everybody else keeps rushing along. And it's just he has this I don't necessarily think it's bad, but we've already found out that QWERTY dies, and Lemony has this response. He has this very delayed response to the fact that QWERTY is dead, and he doesn't have this emotional reaction until he's telling his friends that this has happened. And I understand that can really occur, and it can be a very real thing that happens to real people with trauma. But it just felt very delayed and out of place in this story to me. I felt like we found that out. Lemony Snicket found out 2 chapters ago that QWERTY died. And we read 2 chapters of Lemony Snicket going about relatively business as usual. And then 2 chapters later, he has this really dramatic, long reaction. And in my opinion, and this is likely just an opinion, I feel like we should have just bumped that whole scene sooner into this narrative, because now it just feels very out of place that Lemony Snicket's been moving and solving a mystery and for 2 chapters, and then all of a sudden he's like, "By the way, QWERTY's dead, and I'm going to have this really heavy emotional moment." And then right after, we have to get right back into the mystery. And so I feel like it should have happened closer to QWERTY's death, and have him have, maybe not immediately, he's not going to break down and have a meltdown in the car where it all happened, but bump that earlier in the story so that just narratively he can have this moment of this solemn moment of grief with his friends, and then they can jump back into the mystery instead of having it in between those 2 aspects of the story. So
I have a different opinion, but I'll talk about it in characters.
In characters? Okay. So in general, I thought the writing is good in this story. It's just, it really isn't perfect. So I think that it has similar consistencies to prior books, but overall I feel like there is a lot of exposition and information just kind of not spoon-fed necessarily, but just it's either in Lemony Snicket's narrative or dialogue between characters where we get a lot of information to tie everything back together. And I feel like we should have had some sprinkles of that along the way. Like when you said in the last book, you felt like nothing was happening. I feel like we could have taken some of that exposition and threaded it through books 3 and 4 to tie all of the reasoning and the why together. So that was the biggest reason I didn't give it full points. So 0.5 point out of 1.
Okay. So the third category for books is characters, and out of 3 possible points, I'm giving this 2 points. I think it's got more positives than negatives, but I did have some issues. I'm gonna just kind of talk about a lot of characters, like one at a time, and then I'll probably save Lemony for last. I think Moxie might be the most brave character of them all. She is so consistent from the beginning, and she never, ever allows her fear to stop her from whatever she knows to be right. Now, there are moments where Moxie hesitates, but that's usually the moments where she's trying to determine what is the right thing to do. Once Moxie has made the determination of what the right thing to do is, she doesn't hesitate. That does come to a helm. I can't remember if it's in the end of book 2 or 3, where Moxie literally gets injured by a knife, and now she bears a scar because of her bravery to step forward when nobody else is. And that's a consistency of Moxie's character that I really come to appreciate, because she's not reckless. She's not like, impatient. She just realizes, somebody has to step up and do this, and I will let it be me if that's what it takes. If there's nobody left to do it, I'll do it. So she doesn't hesitate in that way. And I have found that Moxie has just become my favorite character through and through, is because she's just so consistent. And, I think I agree with what you said earlier about, I kind of like that it goes back at one point to it just being Lemony and Moxie, because it feels like we're kind of coming full circle from the beginning of the series. And from book 1, Moxie has been this way. And I wouldn't say that there's no growth, although I feel like there could have been more growth. Perhaps some of that was stifled, but we do have quite a big cast. So I don't expect to see massive growths from everybody. But I think that we see Moxie take what she has learned and adapt that to her consistency. And I appreciate that about her. I was very sad about QWERTY. I talked about, being surprised, but he was also a favorite character of mine. And so the fact that we won't get even, any other interactions with him. We don't get any interactions with QWERTY. We get an overheard conversation, and that's the only interaction we see from QWERTY. So that was really sad for me. It felt like, in a way, like as a reader, I kind of grieved the loss of potential that we had when QWERTY was killed. But I think that that's also a good indication of a good character, is when you feel sad when that character has died. So, again, I wish that we could have gotten more from him, but it is what it is. I feel like with S. Theodora Markson, she has always been a very annoying character for the whole series. She's brash in all of the wrong ways. She's not funny. Even though I think sometimes she's kind of meant to be the funny character in the scene, she rarely kind of hits that note well. But I feel like this book was the opportunity to do something really good with S. Theodora. And while I explained earlier that I kind of understand her reaction, or at least the way I translated her reaction, and her sort of unwillingness to participate for most of the book, I also feel like it stifled a really great growing moment that we could have had with S. Theodora.
Yeah.
And so I was a little disappointed by the fact that she never really got her moment to prove me wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I was a little disappointed about that. The rest of the ally crew, the volunteer crew, are all really consistently good. I mean, they didn't have quite as much time to shine. I feel like other than Moxie, Keller is probably the character with the most screen time, if you will. And I was happy that he was reunited with his sister and his mother. I was happy for that resolution. I was glad that we got a loose end tied up, because we don't get every loose end tied up in the series, and that wasn't necessarily something I was expecting, but I was happy for that resolution. And I was also happy at how, and I talked about this a little bit in the last book, but how seamlessly Keller and Ornette, the two newest members of the crew, step into their roles, and they understand the dangers and what's at stake here, and they don't really shy away from that. Just generally, I feel like the whole volunteer group is very brave young people, and not to the point of like brashness or even like big ego, but just they're confident in their abilities, and they're also confident in each other. And I think it's good to see a friend group who acknowledges everybody's strengths and allows the person with that strength to step into that role when appropriate, instead of being like, oh, I'll figure it out, or you've done too much already. Instead of that sort of conflict ever arising, they already have this sort of knowledge that like this person is good at that, so that is now your job. And I think it's just like a nice thing to see overall. It is a little bit sad to not have the kind of warm, fuzzy friend group moment at the end of the book. But I feel like if Lemony is gonna end up shoving Hangfire into a beast's mouth and killing him, at that point, if there had been a warm, fuzzy friend moment, it probably would have felt kind of icky. So I didn't necessarily take a point off for that. I just kind of wanted to talk about it. That like I kind of feel like we were gypped out of that moment a little bit.
I thought so too. And I'm glad you mentioned that. And I'm just gonna piggyback on that as well. I felt like kind of in my evaluation of the plot, I felt like another kind of theme of this story was that the good people we surround ourselves with, like our allies that have the same propensity to do good and like work towards a common goal of good in the face of evil. It was like, well, we just now, that was kind of the big theme of the story, and now at the end we don't have that.
Yeah.
And I think that, like you said, if we did have that while we watched Lemony Snicket commit a murder, then yeah, it wouldn't have felt consistent. But it also feels like we've just undone everything we've spent 3 books building.
Yeah. The characters of the officers Mitchum and Stu, again, can't really stand them, but it's not anything different than how I've felt about them through the whole series. They're obviously, like, especially Stu, just like trash people kind of in general, either trash or incompetent, you know, which sometimes they feel like one and the same sometimes. I was surprised at bringing back what are their names? Something and Geed.
Yeah. Gifford
and Geed, which they are only ever referenced to in the very beginning of the very first book, because they are the people playing Lemony's parents when they drug him.
They put,
laudanum. They put laudanum, and then they separate from him. And that's how he eventually ends up, you know, with S. Theodora Markson in Stained by the Sea. And it's just, I was surprised that they were brought back. Now, they're not used a lot or anything like that, but I was just surprised that, you know, we've tied in even them. They genuinely brought back like every character possible for this book. Kind of indifferent to that. Ellington. I really don't like her. I've not really liked her much at all. I've found her very interesting, but my perspective of her being interesting does not equate to me liking her much. She has always translated to me as the reader as so selfish all the time. And Lemony continues to give her the benefit of the doubt while acknowledging that she has done heinous things for the sake of saving her father. Like, he fully acknowledges that, and he still continues to try to talk her into doing the right thing and giving her the benefit of the doubt. And, you know, wasn't it great to have the camaraderie of the friend group the few times that you've participated in that? And he uses all of these things, and it frustrates me about him too, because it's like, at what point will you learn? And the point that he learns is the point where he kills her father. And I was like, that's a Lemony complaint, not an Ellington complaint. But the point is that Ellington is consistently here for her own purpose and nobody else's, and it continuously sets her apart from the main cast of young people. And I get frustrated that she has no real moment that she's like, I'm going to do this for somebody other than myself. She has no true moment in the entire series.
Nope.
Every moment that we think is one of those moments is revealed later to have been a trick of hers.
Yep.
And it, by the end of the book, I was kind of like, I think she deserves to be in handcuffs. Can we stop trying to save her from the consequences of her own choices? And maybe that's a minority opinion about Ellington Faint, because the very few things that I've seen on the internet, she seems to be a fan favorite. And again, I get it. She's interesting. But interest only goes so far for me personally as a reader, because if you are actively dismantling the benefit of the doubt that we continue to give you as a reader, or that the main protagonist continues to give you, I only have so many chances for you. I'm sorry. And there's no actual real remorse that Ellington has. She has these moments where it's like, oh, she feels bad about it. No, I think she is a good actress, and she can make Lemony feel like she feels bad about something, but she doesn't actually feel bad about something, because she never, ever, ever changes her, like, what is it called? Modus operandi. She never changes that. It's always the same for her. And so by the end of the series, I was like, I'm done. I'm done with you. I am sick of you and everything that you have done, and how her actions have continuously put Lemony and the others in danger. And she has no remorse for any of that. She deserves to be in handcuffs. I hope she burns at the stake. Sorry. That's maybe too much.
But the thing is like, she is put in handcuffs for something she didn't do.
Right. But everything that she has done deserves handcuffs, in my opinion.
Well, sure. But like, at the end of the story,
she is put in handcuffs.
She's put in handcuffs.
Yeah.
And accused of murder.
Yeah.
Which she didn't do.
Correct. And that's another issue. But at the end of the day, I just do not like Ellington. It's very, very difficult for me to care anymore about her. And maybe that's callous of me. I was surprised at the inclusion of Snicket being in the train at the end. And it's crazy because the role of Kit becomes more important to Lemony as you continue reading, because he reveals in his own inner thoughts or whatever, in narration, he reveals more and more and more about how much he really misses his sister, and the guilt that he feels for the position that she is now put in because he was not there for her. And so the revelation that Kit is in the car and Lemony had no idea the entire time is like, if he had only known, like if he had peeked into that, like that entire book could have been different, because I feel like in that moment, Lemony's motivations for everything else would have gone out the window, because now that guilt he's been holding for books could now be resolved right here, and he doesn't ever know. And it's so interesting. And I feel like it could have been a missed opportunity, but I feel like it's almost just very on brand for Snicket books, is that almost like if he had just known that piece of information everything could have changed. Everything could have been different. And I just felt like that was a very interesting thing to throw in at the end. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about Lemony and I'm going to move on. So, Lemony's not perfect. I had already talked about how frustrated I get with him and his, just insistence of, believing the best of Ellington, even when she really does not deserve it. So that part aside, I am grateful for the humanity, like you mentioned, that we get to see in Lemony in this book. And you had a problem with the pacing of when Snicket finally cracks or crumbles under the grief of QWERTY's death.
Mm-hmm.
I did not have a problem with that. And let me tell you why. So between Snicket finding QWERTY to be dead and his breakdown of grief with his friends in the car, everything that happens between that is Snicket deciding, I have to get to the bottom of this as quickly as possible. And he goes straight into work mode. And to me, it translates as if I think about this right now, I will be useless. I have to go into logical deduction mode or else I will not be useful at all to QWERTY and his memory or any of my friends. I have to just put it aside. But what we see happen in all of that time is he gets increasingly more impatient, irritable. He gets to the point of scolding grown adults in front. And I mean, Snicket is not, Lemony as a character, he's not opposed to telling adults when he thinks they're wrong. However, it usually takes him a bit of time and he does so in a more calm manner. But that chapter where he's going into cars and he's meeting people and he eventually finds the 3 librarians and he ends up like snapping at them. And so you're seeing this masking that he's doing of like, I'm not sad about QWERTY's death, and it's coming out as irritation and impatience, and he continues to move very quickly and he lashes out at Stu, which again, it's deserved. You're not saying like, oh, nobody should tell Stu, but it's a little bit different of Lemony's character than we've seen of him at this point in the series. And for me, I was like, I'm glad I'm seeing something from him other than calculated like indifference in regards to finding the information that he's searching. He's now doing so angrily with very little like tact or patience, and that's different. And then it all culminates and he goes back to his friends and he has this moment and he walks in and he tells them QWERTY is dead. And then it all comes to a screeching halt for him, and all he can do at that point is cry. And I like seeing this of Lemony because he's always been so put it aside, put it aside, put it aside. And so now we get to see like these actual pieces of like humanity and like grief set in on this young boy and all of the frustrations that he's had in Stained by the Sea up till now. And he has this moment like, have I been doing anything good in this town? He has this sort of moment, and I am grateful to see it in this book because we haven't seen it really since. And so I have no problem with this sort of delayed breakdown because you see the tension just within Lemony rising in all of that time between.
I think the reason, and I think I agree to that in characters as a character note, but in quality of writing, again, here we have a story in first person narrative and we don't have any like nuance or subtlety that all of that is building in Lemony throughout that process.
That's fair.
We're just given this objective, like case by case, fact by fact of what Lemony is doing and not how he's feeling throughout any of that. So I agree that is accurately, the outcomes are accurately portrayed, but the behind the curtain insight into Lemony Snicket and how he is processing this death of QWERTY and how that's coming out as irritation or anger. I wish we had a little bit more of that insight as a first person narrative, because we could have had perfect like insight into that. And so I only mentioned, that's why I mentioned it in quality of writing and not character.
Okay, I see. So yeah, but for me, it was like a breath of fresh air. I was like, finally, we're seeing something from Lemony that's not just like, I'm thinking really logically about this. And so because of that, you know, these are the facts. And so I'll now make a decision based on facts. Now we're seeing Lemony making decisions and even speaking out of emotion instead of logic. And I really appreciated seeing it. So that's really all I have for characters. Again, not perfect, but solid. And I really like most of our cast. I just feel like there was some missed opportunities for some good growth and change in some of the characters. But 2 out of 3 for characters.
Cool. So I actually gave this 1 out of 3 for characters. I do agree with a lot of the positives that you have. I agree that they are positives. Another reason that I did not score as high as you also ties into this kind of change in Lemony at the end where he commits murder. I think that's inconsistent with his character throughout the whole series. So I've already hashed all of that in plot and story, but I also consider that in my evaluation of the characters. First of all, I like that our cast is pared down. I like that we don't have every single character when we get highlights of every cast member that we've seen so far. We just get little snippets of these kind of reoccurring characters, but then our highlights of the characters kind of pares down our cast of characters and gives us, I think it's just way more digestible. I think that with Lemony, we finally get this humanization of Lemony, kind of like I mentioned before with him being homesick, missing Kit. Like you talked about, this grief and just the way that he is acting. He doesn't have that indifference throughout all of that. So I completely agree with all of that. The fact that he's guilty, that he wasn't there for Kit, that he's lonely without all of his friends. We open this book and all of his friends are kind of scattered to the winds and he's feeling kind of lonely, that he doesn't have anyone in his circle anymore. He's just kind of on his own. My biggest complaint, kind of like you mentioned, we still have no reason why he likes or even cares about Ellington Faint. And the only hint in why this matters to him is because I promised her that I would help her find her dad. Well, it's like, you know what? You make a bunch of other promises, and I'm pretty sure you probably had to promise as a VFD member not to murder somebody, but apparently that's okay. But you can't break your promise to Ellington Faint. I think that we have no reason to know why he likes her. And again, I feel like this could have easily been fixed if she just like looked like Kit, or if she reminded him of Kit. If there was some or
even, not to say that I think that this would be the better option, but even if it was very clear, because it's not, that Lemony Snicket likes her romantically, period.
Yeah.
But it's so like vague that like you're not even sure if that's really the reason.
Right. Does he like her or not? We don't even really know if he likes her as a friend.
Yeah.
He just is like stuck to being her ally because he promised her.
Yeah.
Like it's such a weak reason, and we don't even really get one. I also think if he cares so much about her, then why does he kill Hangfire? He found out with everyone else that that's her father, and if he really believes that what she wants is to be reunited with her father, why would he make an executive decision to just push him into the abominating beast? Again, completely inconsistent with his character. And then my question was, is he just as morally gray as Ellington or even Hangfire? Was that the point?
Maybe.
Is that Lemony Snicket is just as morally gray and ambiguous and doesn't have a really strong, moral code or compass, and he's just as gray as all the villains? Because if that's the end of the story, I'm sorry, but then you should have set it up along the way that our protagonist is morally gray. Like, you should have just kept it and made it consistent, because instead I felt like you baited and switched us, that this character is good and trying to be good in the face of adversity and evil and villainy, and instead, guess what? He's just as bad as all the villains, because he just, at the end of the day, does what he wants to make it through the world.
This is a side note, but it feels like, okay, so I'm going back to the original series, but it's made very clear in the original series that the villain of Count Olaf was once a noble man, and in the thing of VFD, and then he made all of these decisions and now he's not. But it's like, is that what you're trying to do with Lemony right now as a 13-year-old boy?
Right.
It feels like a very early time to make decisions like that.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
But
and then it's also, if that was the goal at the end, which I don't think that was the goal from the outset. I don't really get the impression that this is where the author wanted to end up with his characters. It felt like just kind of a flimsy ending to his characters. But if that is what he wanted, was to end the story with a morally gray protagonist who does evil just as much as he does good, then this is the wrong age demographic to have that conversation. Because for an 8-year-old, you need to have a little bit more like look at like a Monster Calls. Like an 8 to 10-year-old could read a Monster Calls, and the morality and like moral of that story is very clear and explicitly stated by the end of the story.
Yeah.
And this book doesn't. It just leaves you like, this is what happened, the end.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't give you any kind of rationalization or justification and again, we have a first person narrative and we have no reason. Why did he kill Hangfire? We don't even understand why he did that.
Yeah.
He doesn't even have this, we don't even get this insight that he thought this is the lesser of two evils. I'm trying to save,
everybody else. Yeah.
Hangfire wasn't even doing anything. He wasn't even trying to he was trying to throw.
It was like the abominating beast was going to kill somebody and I made the decision. Or
Hangfire was trying to throw his own daughter to the abominating beast and I
Right.
pushed him and saved Ellington. No, literally everybody's standing there.
Feed him Cordy's body.
Yeah, everyone's standing there and Lemony Snicket just decides, I'm going to push this guy. Like, it came out of nowhere. It was not necessary for the plot or the characters. I think Moxie really shines in this story, in this book especially. Her entrance really makes her shine. She's warm, she's capable, she's competent, she's tenacious. She hits every aspect of heroism in this story, and I'm a little disappointed because that's what our protagonist should have been in this story. And instead it was Moxie, who is still a main character, but I felt like she shined at the end of the day way more than any of the other characters, but especially Lemony. Ellington, I agree with a lot of what you said, but I really like that she stays consistent. She doesn't have this big oops, I've changed moment. Has this, and I really like this confrontation she has with Lemony Snicket. They have this pretty heated confrontation moment where we don't really gain any more insight to her, but I like that she's not wrong about Lemony constantly pushing her to do what he wants. And it's like, again, we kind of tie this back in. He's not any better than Hangfire. Hangfire's pushing Ellington to do what he wants, and Lemony's pushing Ellington to do what he wants. And so Ellington's in the middle of these two people just trying to push her towards their own ideology or opinion of what she should be doing. And so I kind of like that she calls him out on it and isn't afraid to just say hey, well, you're just constantly trying to push me to do what you want me to do, instead of you just kind of, and she doesn't say this, but instead of just kind of realizing I am who I am, which is what Lemony should have done, realize she is who she is and she's going to do what she's going to do and either take her or leave her. And I think obviously he should have just left her because she's more trouble than she's worth. But I like that she stays consistent all the way to the end of the story. Hangfire, I really liked that we've kind of tied into this lack of morality, the survival of the fittest, this Darwinist kind of naturalist, because Armstrong Faint is this great naturalist, and so for Hangfire just to think the strong will survive. I like that take on life and that worldview can make for a very amoral villain, because he has no reason to have altruistic motives or to want the better of other people, because that's not how quote unquote animals function in the wild. So why should I? So I like that we kind of tied that in. It makes for a really sinister villain. And I appreciated that we just kind of stuck to this bad man as a bad man. We're not going to try and make him this sympathetic villain at the end who's, he was great until his wife died, or he was great until, one tragic life circumstance happened and, he's a misunderstood villain. No, he's just a bad dude. And so I appreciated that we just kept him a villain. But I do think that this reveal in chapter 12, even when we find out that this is Armstrong Faint, we still have no understanding of his motive. Why does he want the Abominating Beast, like the little statue, so he can call the Abominating Beast? Why? What does he want to do with any of that? Why does he care? Why is he kidnapping these children? Why is he doing any of this? Like, we still don't have any understanding of this whole plot. We've spent 4 books learning about this sinister villainous plot, and at the end we've unmasked our villain like Scooby-Doo, and he couldn't even give us like a monologue about why he's doing what he's doing. Like, I just felt very disappointed, because at the end of it I still couldn't tell you what the heck the fish tanks were for, and the tadpoles. I mean, they were like the babies of the Abominating Beast, but it's like, why? What's he going to do with it? What's his plan? Is he just going to like release more Abominating Beasts into the wild and let them wreak havoc because let's just watch the world burn? I don't know. We really have no understanding of the why behind our villainy, and we don't really need it necessarily, but then why do we spend 4 books setting it up? Like, it could have just been a one-off, like, I'm evil and here is my evil maniacal plot, I'm gonna steal the moon. Like, it could have just been something that silly.
Tonight
but
we call the Abominating Beast.
Yeah, that's what it felt like. And then also in chapter 13, this just really weak exposition, and it felt like Armstrong faints like reveal, and anything that happens before he dies is just like a Darth Vader moment. I just felt like it was like, I am your father, Ellington. No! Like, that's all. But
even she was just like,
okay. Like, which again, I wonder, maybe she did know the whole time.
I think she knew. My headcanon is that she knew.
I think that's perfectly valid. And then I thought the rest of the cast, I didn't dislike any of the other cast. I do think that the rest of Lemony Snicket's gang gets very minor, very limited screen time, if you will. But I thought it was so interesting that we've set every single one of these characters up as they're the good people and the good books that are going against, the villains. And yet not a single one of them at the end of the day would stand for the truth that Ellington's not a murderer. Not one of them. They all just keep quiet and let her get arrested for her dad's murder, and no one says a thing. So it's like, okay, at the end of the day, we've set these people up as heroes, and then our protagonist is a murderer, and nobody else will even stand up for the truth. And so it's like, so what was the point of these characters at the end of the day? Like, yeah, Ellington did bad things, and she should go to jail for the villainy that she did do.
But she didn't murder anybody.
But she didn't murder anyone. Mm-hmm. And she's being arrested for Hangfire's murder, and the entirety of Lemony Snicket's gang is just like, yeah, okay. Take her away, officers.
Fair.
Like, come on.
That's
so
fair.
At the end of the day, it's like we've set up these people as moral, good people. And at the end of the book, it's almost like none of them were. And so I feel like that's pretty disappointing. And again, we could have just changed a couple things. Like, how many times in a series of unfortunate events, again, no spoilers, did we watch kids try and tell adults the truth and the adults refuse to believe it?
Yeah.
We could have tried it. We could have had them say, look, she's a villain, but she didn't murder anyone. And them say...
the officers Mitch and be like, well,
and even
it makes sense or whatever, that she would murder. So.
Right, because she's...
if she lied, she would murder,
right. And even Lemony say, look, I did it. I committed the crime. I should do the time. That alone would have redeemed his actions.
True.
Like, I panicked. I thought somebody else was going to die instead. So and them go, nope, you're free to go. She's going away. We could have resolved all of that with just having the officers mention.
I mean, they've already
do
set
what
up
they've already done,
which is just be dumb.
Which is be dumb and wrong every time. Even have Stu push Armstrong faint.
That's true.
Like that. I mean, there was so many
to
other
save
ways.
Himself or whatever.
Yeah, there's so many other ways we could have tied this up at the end, and I feel like it was just a disservice to the plot and these characters. So 1 out of 3.
Okay. So our 4th category is personal taste and preference. We allot 2 points for this, and despite everything, I gave it 2 full points because I liked it, and I know it had plenty of problems, and we've talked about those problems, but I think this is my favorite in this entire series, which is crazy to say considering all of the things that we just talked about. But to me, it felt like the freshest one within the whole series, and I know that maybe the location is not necessarily fresh for the genre. I don't know, something about the pacing and the way that I felt like we were just constantly moving, and I think I enjoyed myself the most.
Yeah.
And really, isn't that kind of what personal taste and preference comes down to, is your personal enjoyment? And of all the 4 books, I enjoyed myself the most reading this one. So not to hash anything out too long, but that was the reason why. So 2 out of 2 points.
Nice. Out of 2 possible points, I actually gave this 0 out of 2, which I think is going to make Tori pretty sad.
It's okay.
But the end of the story was just so unsatisfying for me. Hangfire being Ellington's father was wasted potential. Lemony Snicket's friend had no closure. There was just abrupt severance of the buildup of 4 books. Kid at the end felt just like a tease. Lemony Snicket committing murder was just glossed over, but Ellington Fink gets falsely arrested. VFD name drops were useless and fan service. The unveiling of the master plan was dull and clumsily talked through. I felt like I spent 4 books waiting for a payoff, and all I got was laudanum and a moth-eaten library book.
Oof.
So, sorry. But that's just kind of how I felt when I finished this story. And although I do think there are some objectively good things, just personally, I was like, man, it just left me upset.
Okay.
So...
All right, so the final category is creativity, and out of 1 point, I give this half a point. I do think that there are a few just tropes within the Snicket series that may be used too much at this point. For instance, just like, maybe trope is the wrong word, but just like Snicket always giving Ellington the benefit of the doubt. It would have been great if he'd finally been like, you know what? I'm not going to trust you anymore. And just stepped away. That moment would have been a more creative response to what we've seen from a lot. So I feel like moments like that are present enough that it didn't necessarily feel super creative within itself. But I do think that what redeemed that for me, and so this is why I gave it half a point, half credit, is those plot twists that genuinely surprised me. And then, and it happening technically 3 times, because we had QWERTY's murder, which surprised me, Ellington's murder, which surprised me, and then Ellington actually not being murdered, which surprised me.
Right.
And then the mini surprise of Armstrong being Hangfire. So those things kind of redeemed the creativity of I keep seeing this. And I think there's a difference between consistency and just reusing a response, a character response. And so that's kind of what I'm more leaning toward, is kind of how some character responses just never change, despite the fact that it should have been different by this point. It's kind of like the, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result is insanity. Then why does that keep happening? You know what I mean? Yeah. So all of that to say, I don't think it was necessarily overall super creative within itself, but from a plot standpoint, I felt like there was enough twisties to make me feel satisfied with them. So half a point out of 1 for creativity.
Alrighty. I actually gave this 0 out of 1 for creativity. I think that a lot of the aspects that I think you do attribute to creativity, personally, I feel like a lot of classic mysteries have already kind of ticked those boxes. But specifically for this book, I feel like this last book was a failed attempt to revitalize the Lemony Snicket series. I think it missed the mark as to what made the original great. There's no triumph or hope at the end, and like the theme of each title, we are only given more questions than answer. I feel like a big theme of the original series of unfortunate events at the end of the series, even though these, again, no spoilers, these unfortunate events happen, at the very end of the series, we have a triumph at the end. Good triumphs over evil. Yeah. And at the end of this series...
The perseverance leads to triumph.
Right. Yeah. Even if the triumph is not the, winner gets a pony, or
it's not a spectacle necessarily.
Right.
Yeah.
But there is triumph. Good does prevail. And at the end of this story, good does not prevail. A person gets murdered, a person gets wrongly accused and goes to jail, Lemony Snicket loses all his friends, and all his friends that are supposed to be good people don't stand up for what's good, and Lemony Snicket's sister that he's been pining after this whole story is also going to jail. So there's no satisfying triumph at the end of this series, and I feel like it almost feels like the direct-to-DVD sequel to a series of unfortunate events. And I can understand possibly the argument that, well, Lemony Snicket as a narrator in a series of unfortunate events is this like tragic, like forlorn, almost depressed narrator. But at 13, we can't set him up to be depressed at 13, almost 13.
Yeah.
Like, a grown man can be depressed and have lived a horrible, tragic life and be a depressed adult narrator for a children's, like, the story of 3 Baudelaire children. But we didn't even set up Lemony Snicket, the character, to have this like tragedy at the end of his story to give us a reason for this forlorn, tragic narrator as an adult. So it didn't even really feel like, if that would be your argument, that, well, Lemony Snicket doesn't get a happy ending because look how sad he is with, you know, his, what's it called when you at the beginning, you dedicate. His dedication at every book is to Beatrice. Yeah. No spoilers, but his dedication every book is to Beatrice. And so here's this sad man with his lost love, seemingly lost love at every... But that's an adult talking about that. And we didn't even get this story to end with a sad, tragically forlorn character at the end of it. So I don't think that's a valid argument that, well, Lemony Snicket doesn't get a happy ending because he's not a happy narrator in the writing about the littlest elf. Like, I don't think that's a valid argument. And so I think the lack of triumph and the lack of good actually prevailing at the end, I think that that's what made the first series so desirable, because even at the end of every book in the series of a series of unfortunate events, I think you could argue that there is some even spark of triumph that occurs at some point in that story. And at the end of this book, I don't think we had any. So that's why I don't think it's a successful sequel. I think it's a failed attempt to do what I think the original series did better. So that's the biggest reason I didn't give it points. So 0 out of 1.
Okay.
So what is your final score?
Mine is 8 out of 10.
Wow.
Yours is not going to be that.
No. Mine is 2.5
wow,
out of
big
10.
difference.
Yeah.
This might be one of our widest differences.
Yeah, I think so. Definitely.
Oh, wow.
Man, but no hard feelings.
Yeah,
of course.
It happens.
Like, we're allowed to that's why we have this podcast.
That might also happen next episode.
It might. Stay tuned.
We haven't recorded that one yet, so we don't know, but I have a feeling it might happen
I don't know. It might not. You don't know. Stay tuned. 2 weeks, you can find out what it is. Alrighty. Are you ready for some lightning? Oh,
sure.
No. Any final thoughts?
No, not really. No, not really. I think I said everything.
Okay.
So.
Alrighty. So some lightning round questions. It always makes my face blue, but oh well. All right. For the whole series, favorite character?
Moxie. Yeah, QWERTY would be a second, I think, but Moxie. I just really love her.
Yeah.
So, she's great.
Yeah. I think I would... I think with this book, I think I would also say Moxie. I think Moxie did great.
She's fantastic.
Or Ellington. I do still really like Ellington as a character. She's not a great person. I would not like her if she was a real person in real life. I wouldn't like her. But I do like her as a character. I think she's interesting as a character. Least favorite character for the whole series?
The Officers Mitchum, probably. Or Stu Mitchum. The Mitchum family. Can I choose them as a unit?
Yeah.
Okay, the Mitchum family.
You can pick all of them.
They're awful.
Yeah. This is going to be so controversial, but I think I would have to say Lemony.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I can understand why, because your reasonings.
He's a murderer. Like, you just, like, cold-blooded murderer.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
and then he just gets off scot-free.
Yep. Walks off on his own.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Did you have a most satisfying moment at the end of this series?
At the end, I was satisfied, but I don't know if I would have any moment that was like the most satisfying.
Well,
moment.
what about the end was satisfying for you?
I think it was just this is gonna sound awful of me actually, but I think it was just like Lemony Snicket finally just like moving on and just like, instead of, especially after murdering Hangfire with the abominating beast, I feel like the decision of him to just kind of like walk away was probably the best one at that moment. If he was not going to be arrested, he needs to at least separate himself and just let the town take care of itself now. So I think in that way I was satisfied, because I felt like if he'd stayed any longer, it wouldn't have really been indicative of like super camaraderie because of his actions at that point. So everything at that point probably would have felt very awkward and forced. So I feel like in that way it was satisfying for him to just walk away at that point.
Yeah. I think this is going to be kind of a weird take, but I thought it was satisfying to me that when Lemony Snicket and Kit see each other, that both of them have to like keep their covers from being blown. And I felt like that was really satisfying because it felt so consistent with all like the espionage and like secrecy that the VFD has to have. And so I was like, oh, Lemony's just going to break her out right now. And I was like, oh no, but he doesn't, because he can't, because they have to like stay on track with their own work that they have to do. And so I liked that stayed really consistent. And I felt like that was pretty satisfying. I also thought another thing in the story that I liked that they made a point that Cleo Knight's invisible ink can still save the town.
Yeah.
And I think that was a nice, like, satisfying piece to give your readers that, like, all of these characters that you may have come to love throughout the way, they're going to be okay at the end of the story.
Yeah.
Do you have a biggest surprise at the end of the series?
I mean, definitely QWERTY's death, I think, was the biggest surprise for me.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think that was my big surprise as well. That and then Kit being on the train. I think that was the biggest surprise for me. I was not expecting that at all. I was expecting somebody to get murdered because I thought this was going to be Murder on the Orient Express. But I didn't think they were going to actually kill QWERTY.
Yeah.
Favorite cameo of the whole series?
Of the whole series? It might have been Josephine, and she has a meal with them at Jake Hicks's diner, and I think it's a nice moment, and she and Lemony have a decent conversation, and then she just moves on. It's not anything like super drawn out.
Yeah.
But it's also what's funny is how he speaks of Josephine. I think he mentions that like she's one of the bravest people I know, and so it's pre-trauma Josephine, and we see her in the main series as adult Josephine, who's gone through so much grief and loss, and she's become a completely different person at that point.
Yeah.
So it's nice to see like pre-trauma Josephine, and like when she was not afraid of anything.
Yeah.
So
I would agree. That was my answer. So, and for all the same reasons, I thought it was neat. Okay. All the Wrong Questions references several famous literary works. Of the following books referenced, which of these have you read, is your favorite, or would you like to read? There's only 4. The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka in Chapter 1. Lemony Snicket's reading this book and leaves it behind in the Far East Suite. Corduroy by Don Freeman in Chapter 2. While passing a floor selling toys, Lemony thinks about the bear being caught by the night watchman. And then To Kill a Mockingbird, that's what the ending that he spoils for Polly Partial in Chapter 2. And then The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. In Chapter 2, Snicket tips this book by name to Pip and Squeak.
I've read To Kill a Mockingbird and Corduroy. I feel like picking a favorite between those two is hard because they're very different books.
Yeah. You can say or. I mean, it says or, so.
Yeah. I'd like to read The Turn of the Screw, I think. Also, I don't know if this is a next question that you have, but one thing I thought I liked was Lemony references authors that were also librarians, and one of the people that he mentions is Beverly Cleary, and I read a lot of her books growing up, the Ramona books and the Henry Huggins books. I read those growing up, so even though those books aren't referenced, Beverly Cleary is, and I really liked that. So.
Yeah. I have actually only read To Kill a Mockingbird. I've never read Corduroy.
Really? It's like a classic.
So I think I would want to read that one.
Yeah.
Actually, maybe I did. No, I never read Paddington, but I did read
Okay.
Corduroy.
Yeah.
I did read Corduroy. I've never heard of The Metamorphosis or The Turn of the Screw. So I guess if I had to pick one of those, I would pick The Turn of the Screw.
Okay.
But I would say To Kill a Mockingbird is one of my favorite books. My dog is named Scout after Scout from To Kill a Mockingbird. Scout Finch. What series, if you could invent one, what series would you like to see next in a series of unfortunate events universe? And follow-up question, what literary genre would you like to see used for another spin-off series? So for example, this series was about Lemony Snicket.
Right.
It was very like film noir kind of themed. So you can pick another spin-off and then a genre to go with that spin-off.
Okay. This might be a weird take.
Okay.
But I would like a prequel series kind of like this one that follows Olaf as a young boy or teenager or whatever, a younger man. And maybe what eventually led him to make the decisions he did to eventually be considered a villain. I'd like to see that, and maybe in like a genre. I feel like that's difficult because you still want it to feel Snickety, and I feel like overall Snicket works have a level of mystery to them. So I'd want to keep that. But
yeah, but you could still have like, I think that like you could it could be like a drama, it could be like a comedy of errors, it could be like a tragedy.
Wouldn't it be interesting if, let's say it was written, okay, I just had an idea.
Let's say it could be like a period piece.
I have an idea. So
go for it.
Count Olaf is a theater actor.
Uh-huh.
What if his prequels were written by him in his perspective, and they were written as scripts?
A play.
Yeah.
Yes,
or
I love it. I love it.
So that would be really cool, I think.
Yeah. And it would
Lemony
be...
Snicket, if you reading this, Mr. Handler, you can take that idea. And as long as I can get copies of the book, I won't even say anything.
I think that's great. You could write it as a as a stage play.
Yeah.
With the blocking and like set pieces and everything. Yeah, that would be great. I would want to see like a young, not like teenager, but like a young adult Kit Snicket as a spinoff, written in like an espionage, like spy novel. So like Mission Impossible kind of things, where it's very like intrigue, espionage, like covert, like operations. Because then you could work into, you know how a lot of those stories have like a romantic interest, and then at the I'm not going to spoil it, but that you could integrate that in to tie into where her story arc moves to. Yeah.
The significant events that are referenced.
Right. Yeah. And then the way that she seems to already be working for the VFD seems very like kind of Mission Impossible, like disarming bombs and digging in tunnels and stuff. And so I feel like you could keep that theme, like style, and that would still fit Snicket's writing style. So that's what I would
another
see.
Second idea I had, this is just me saying it because it came into my head. It would also be nice to see a sequel following the grown Baudelaire children, and it almost being kind of like a slice of life, kind of cozy, but you still have a little bit of like that shadowy secret side of Snicket that comes up. But overall, it's more of like a cozy slice of life.
Yeah,
like,
we get to like see them with a happy ending.
Yeah.
No, I think that's great. So Lemony Snicket, you can steal our ideas.
Yeah.
So just send us free copies of the books.
Copies of the books, and we're good.
We're good. So, any final thoughts?
No, I love Snicket, and even I feel like even his worst book is great. Yeah. So, I know that we pick apart stuff, but it's, for me at least, it's not out of a lack of love by any means. It's because I just really appreciate it, and I know how great he can be. And so when it's not as great, it's easier to pick that apart sometimes, because you're like, I know the level of perfection that can be attained. But genuinely, like, I think I'll probably live my whole life a Snicket fan. So, you know, I'm just always going to love his books.
Yeah. So if you want us to do a series of unfortunate events for our podcast next, let us know. Leave a comment. Send us a request. Alrighty. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on this episode. We hope you had a good time. We know that we did. If you have an idea of what we should review next, you can find our submission form on lionandmousepodcast.com. You can also leave us a comment on whatever platform you're listening to. I know Spotify has comments, YouTube has comments. You can also connect with us on our socials. If you want to read our notes from this episode or prior episodes, you can find links to our show notes at lionandmousepodcast.com. We also have links to all the content that we review. So if you're looking to pick a copy up of this book, we got links there as well. We also have links to our Patreon, socials, all kinds of fun stuff there for you guys to check out. If you would, please leave us a review on whatever podcast platform you are listening to. If you're on YouTube, give us a like, subscribe, comment. All of that really helps us know that you're listening and what you like and don't like. It also helps us reach as many people as possible. If you want to share this with some friends, please feel free. Thank you guys so much for listening. We appreciate all the support, and we will catch you in the next one.